or British English? What's the difference and which one should you learn? My name is Michael Anton. I'm the founder of English at the Ready, and today we're going to talk about the differences between American and British English when it comes to accent and pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and spelling. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to English at the Ready and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future lessons from me. Now, in today's lesson, as I said, we're going to talk about the differences between American and British English. Why American? Why British? Well, simply put, these are the most widely spoken forms of English. Of course, we have Canadian, we have Australian, we have New Zealand English, but today we're just going to focus on American and British English because they're the most common. And in today's lesson, we're going to talk about accent and pronunciation. We're going to talk about grammar, about vocabulary, and of course about spelling. So in American and British English, there are some differences, especially when it comes to these four categories. Now, let's start with accent and pronunciation. If you're wondering, I'm actually not American. I'm Canadian. I was born in Vancouver, Canada, and even though I'm Canadian, the Canadian accent sounds very, very similar to the American accent. So if you didn't know I was Canadian, you might have guessed I was American. For the purposes of our lesson today, you can pretend I have an American accent because, to be honest, there's no big difference. Now, there are many different accents in both the United Kingdom and in the US. For example, in the UK, you have a London accent, you have a Scottish accent, you have a Welsh accent, you have Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, all these different accents. And in the US, you might have a Southern accent, you might have a Boston accent, a New York accent. But in today's lesson, we're going to focus on the standard forms. This doesn't mean that one accent is better than the other, because that's not true. But since there are so many accents, I want to keep this as simple as possible, and I want to talk to you about the standard accents that you might learn in school. So when we talk about the standard American accent, we're talking about something called General American English, or GA. The standard British accent is called Received Pronunciation, or RP. Now, I have a list of words, and I have their American pronunciation and their British or received pronunciation. Now, as I said before, I am Canadian, so I speak more like an American. I'm going to try to pronounce the received British pronunciation of these words as well, but of course I'm not British, and a native speaker from the UK could definitely pronounce them much better than I could. But I'll give it a try. So the first word on our list is better. I pronounce it, Americans pronounce it like bed, better, better. So we're pronouncing that t sound like a d. But in the UK, they would say better, better. So you can see they're pronouncing the t like a t, t. And they're actually not pronouncing the r in the same way we do in American English. They pronounce it like not r, but a. In American English, we say tomato, tomato, but in British English, they might say tomato, tomato. Again, you can see the T sound in American English is more like a D, but in British English, it often stays like a T. In American English, we'd say vitamin, vitamin. In British English, in received pronunciation, they might say vitamin, vitamin. Quality, quality. activity, 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 and activity. So you can see that again, that D sound, or rather that T sound in British English becomes a D in American English. Quality, activity. And lastly, I mentioned the R sound. In American English, we might say car, bar, or far. But in British English, in received pronunciation, they might say ka, ba, or fa. Again, I'm sure a native speaker from the UK could pronounce the words in received pronunciation a lot better than I can, but I just wanted to give you a few examples. Now, let's talk about spelling. So, there are two major categories of spelling in English. We have American spelling, and we have what I call British influenced spelling. Now, obviously, this does include British English, British spelling in the UK, but it also includes spelling in countries that used to be part of the British Empire. For example, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or India. Now, if you're interested, Canadian spelling is a mix between American and British spelling. We have influence from the UK, obviously, through our British history, but also, since we're so close to the US, we have a lot of influence from the United States as well. In American English, we often spell words without a U. So we'd say color or honor with no U. But in the British style of spelling, we would add that U. We would say color or honor with a U. Meter, center, and theater in American English are spelt ER. But in British English, they're spelled RE. In American English, words that end in I's, so analyze and realize, are often spelled with a Z in American English and with an S in British English. So analyze with an S or realize with an S. Defense and offense in American English is spelt with an S, and in British English, they're spelt with a C. When we talk about the past participle of certain verbs, in American English, they might spell them with ED. For example, learned, spelled, or dreamed. But in British English, it's quite common to spell them just with a T. For example, learnt, spelt, or dreamt. Before we continue the lesson, make sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments if you're finding this video useful. And don't forget to subscribe to English at the Ready here on YouTube and to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future English lessons from me. Lastly, if you're serious about improving your English this year, click the link in the description below to learn more about how I can help you start speaking English confidently and fluently. With that said, let's get back into the lesson. When we talk about vocabulary, there are certain words that are completely different in American English and British English. For example, the Americans might call it an elevator, but the British would call it a lift. In American English, we say soccer. That's the sport that we kick a ball with using our feet. In British English, they'd call this football. Now, in American English, football exists, but it's a totally different sport. It's where you're throwing the ball, you're tackling people. You might think of the NFL. So it's a completely different sport. In British English, they call that American football. For the British, football is soccer. You might have players like Messi or Ronaldo. They play football or soccer. A truck in American English is a lorry. In American English, an apartment is a flat in British English. So you live in an apartment or you live in a flat. The Americans say math. For example, I studied math at school. The British might say maths. I studied maths at school. In American English, we say gas, and in British English, you would put petrol in your car. Now, American English and British English are very similar when it comes to grammar. They're both standard English, but there are a couple differences, and I want to talk to you about that today. Now, maybe you've heard of the concept of collective nouns. A collective noun is a noun which contains many different people. For example, government or team. The government is comprised of many different people. The team is comprised of many different people. Now, in American English, these nouns, these collective nouns, are singular. For example, the government is, or the team is. But in British English, they often put these in the plural. The government are. The team are. Now, the past participle of the verb to get in American English might be have got. For example, I've got a good score on my test. In British English, they might say gotten. I have gotten a good score on my test. And lastly, this is a common one that you might see, especially if you're watching the BBC, you're watching a British news channel. The use of the definite article before the word hospital. In American English, we'd say he's in the hospital. In British English, they'd say he's in hospital. So without the word the. He's in the hospital and he's in hospital. Now, in British English, they might say he's in the hospital, but that has a different meaning. It means that he's physically in a specific building of the hospital. He's in the hospital. But if you're saying somebody is in hospital, they've been hospitalized, they injured themselves, they had to go to the hospital. In American English, they would say the hospital, but in British English, they just say he's in hospital. All right, that brings us to the end of today's lesson. We've talked about the differences between American and British English. I've talked to you about accent and pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and spelling. If you found this lesson useful, please leave me a like and let me know in the comments. I really appreciate it and it really helps the channel out. Don't forget to subscribe to English at the Ready here on YouTube and to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future English lessons from me. And lastly, if you're serious about improving your English this year, click the link in the description below to learn more about how I can help you start speaking English confidently and fluently. I hope you found this lesson useful, and I'll